It happened on my 62nd birthday, the night my life split clean in two. I was sitting beneath the soft golden lights of a small Italian restaurant in Atlanta, waiting for my son Jordan and his wife Kayla. The table glowed with warmth, with wine poured, bread waiting, laughter just within reach. It should have been an ordinary celebration, a mother's quiet joy. But fate has a way of turning comfort into warning. As the waitress leaned over to clear crumbs from the table, she slipped a folded note beside my plate. Her eyes flicked up to mine, only for a second, but the message in them froze my breath. Beneath the table, my hand shook as I opened the paper. 4 words scribbled in rushed ink. Don't drink that. My half-full glass of Cabernet sat gleaming red under the light. Across from me, Kayla smiled that soft, polite smile she always wore, one that never touched her eyes. Jordan laughed, unaware of the storm about to break. My heart pounded so hard I could feel the pulse in my neck. I'd spent 30 years investigating fraud. I knew the weight of instinct, the sound of danger that whispers without proof. So, when Jordan turned to call for more bread, I moved quietly, switching glasses with Kayla in one smooth, practiced motion. She didn't notice. The wine looked identical, dark, still, harmless. 5 minutes later, Kayla's laughter faltered. Her face blanched white as porcelain. She clutched her stomach, gasped, and collapsed into her chair. Chaos erupted around us. The restaurant blurred into noise, shouts, chairs scraping, Jordan yelling her name. I just sat there, the folded note trembling in my hand, knowing I had either saved my life or destroyed my family. The ambulance lights painted the night red and white as we sped to St. Jude Medical Center. Kayla was rushed away, Jordan pacing the hallway like a caged soul. He muttered something about food poisoning, his voice breaking. I didn't answer. I just pressed the note in my pocket, like it was the only real thing left in the world. When the doctor finally returned, his expression told me everything before he even spoke. Digitalis, a cardiac medication, deadly when mixed with alcohol. It wasn't an accident, it was intent. I asked if it could be dissolved in wine. He nodded, and that single gesture hollowed out my chest. When he left, I demanded my own blood test. For months, I'd felt dizzy, confused, forgetful. Little things I'd blamed on age, but now every symptom felt like a clue I had missed. Jordan sat beside me, his hands shaking, his voice desperate to believe this was a mistake. I watched him the way I'd once studied suspects. His fear was genuine, his confusion real. When the nurse returned to tell him Kayla had asked for him, I stayed behind. Minutes later, he came out pale as paper. She said to check the power of attorney documents, he whispered. My stomach dropped. I remembered that day, weeks ago, how Kayla had insisted I was forgetful, gently pushing papers toward me with a pen already waiting. She'd said it was for security. Now I saw it for what it was, a trap. That night, while Jordan sat at her bedside, I stared at the ceiling of my quiet house, the shadows shifting across the walls. The dizziness I'd felt, the fatigue, the subtle changes. They weren't coincidence. They were calculation. And for the first time, I realized I had been preyed upon not by strangers, but by family. The next morning, I returned to the hospital cafeteria, my hands trembling around a cup of coffee. That was when the waitress from the restaurant appeared. She was young, nervous, but her eyes carried resolve. Her name was Renee Carter, a nursing student. She told me she hadn't slipped that note by chance. 2 years ago, her grandmother Eleanor Price had died suddenly at Magnolia Crest, a private elder care home. The cause had been listed as heart failure, but Renee never believed it. Her grandmother had been healthy, vibrant, until the weeks before her death, and she remembered Kayla Mercer. She'd seen her at Magnolia Crest, volunteering, always near the patients who later declined. Renee showed me a photo she had taken recently outside Cole Cardiology Group, a picture of Kayla carrying a clear medical bag filled with drug samples. Digitalis, the same drug in Kayla's blood that night. My pulse steadied as the pattern emerged. This wasn't just a family betrayal. It was something bigger, something practiced. Back home, I unlocked the cabinet that held the remnants of my old investigative life. Files, ledgers, timelines. I started marking the dates I'd felt sick. Each one matched the days Kayla had visited. Days she'd brought soup, tea, wine. I checked my grocery orders. I hadn't bought half the things she'd brought for me. Then I pulled up my front door camera logs. There she was, Kayla, smiling, carrying bags. Always when Jordan was away. I turned to the financial records next. Designer handbags, a diamond bracelet. Weekend trips labeled medical retreats. I knew her salary couldn't afford any of it. The money had to be coming from somewhere else. My investigation led me back to Cole Cardiology Group, the same clinic where she had access to controlled samples. Every thread tightened around her name, but I also knew this. Kayla and her employer had money, connections, and the power to twist any accusation. I couldn't strike head on, not yet. So I did what I'd always done best, worked in silence. That evening, I drafted an anonymous report to the state medical board, detailing irregularities in Cole Cardiology Group's medication logs. I didn't name her, but I gave enough to spark a quiet storm. That same night, Renee trailed Kayla and filmed her meeting someone in the clinic's parking lot. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to show her receiving a small box and hiding it in her trunk. Proof, not of murder, but of misconduct. In the world of medicine, that was enough to make cracks appear. For the first time in weeks, I felt control shifting back toward me. In the days that followed, I lived as though my house had turned into an evidence room. The dining table became a command center, littered with photographs, bank statements, and medical records. Every line, every date whispered a new truth I had been too trusting to see. It wasn't enough to prove Kayla had been careless with medication. I needed to expose why she had done it, and who had been pulling the strings beside her. When Renee mentioned seeing Kayla speaking to a man outside the clinic, a doctor named Raymond Cole, I began tracing his records. He was a respected cardiologist, the face of Cole Cardiology Group, and his connections stretched from hospitals to insurance boards. Kayla wasn't acting alone. She was part of his web, but bringing down people like them required more than proof. It required precision. So I began setting the trap. Using a prepaid phone, Renee sent a message to Kayla pretending to be a contact from the clinic. The text asked her to meet in the hospital parking garage to discuss cleaned samples Jordan agreed to help, his guilt still fresh and raw. I could see it in the way he avoided my eyes, as if apologizing wasn't enough. That night, as he clipped the recorder inside his jacket, I felt both fear and pride. Fear that we were stepping too close to danger, and pride that my son was finally standing with me instead of beside her. We waited from a distance as Kayla arrived. She looked nervous, scanning the shadows. Her voice, when it came through the tiny recorder, was sharp and rushed. She said, "Dr. Rye will cover for me. He'll fix the paperwork." The familiarity in the way she spoke his name, Rye, sent a chill down my spine. Then, almost carelessly, she said something that made my blood freeze. "The baby changes everything." My throat closed around the words. The baby? Jordan had been away on a 72-hour fire shift during the window she mentioned. The math didn't lie. It wasn't his child. And the way she said Rye told me exactly who the father was. That moment shattered whatever fragments of doubt I had left. It wasn't just about control of my estate. Kayla's betrayal was personal, intimate, and corrupt to its core. She had poisoned my body and my trust, all while weaving herself into the arms of another man. When Jordan listened to the recording later, his face collapsed in on itself. He whispered that he didn't know her anymore. I told him softly that none of us ever truly had, but I wasn't finished. That piece of truth was only a weapon if wielded legally. I made an appointment with Marilyn Duarte, an elder law attorney known for dismantling fraudulent guardianship cases. Sitting in her quiet office, I laid everything out: the hospital note, the toxicology report, Renee's footage, and the garage recording. Marilyn didn't interrupt once. By the time I finished, her pen was already moving. She filed an emergency petition that same afternoon. Within 48 hours, the court suspended Kayla's power of attorney and froze all access to my accounts. I remember the relief that came with that order. It wasn't joy, but the kind of stillness that comes after holding your breath too long. When investigators reviewed my finances, the truth came pouring out like dirty water. Jewelry, spa retreats, designer clothes, all funded by small withdrawals Kayla had made over months, masked as home care expenses. Each one was proof of exploitation. Jordan submitted a sworn statement admitting she had convinced him I was becoming forgetful. That affidavit shattered the illusion she had built around us. By the end of that week, I had taken back control of my life. She could no longer touch a cent, and her carefully crafted image began to crumble. With Kayla legally cornered, Renee and I turned to the past, to the people who couldn't fight back. We drove to the county records office and requested death certificates tied to Magnolia Crest, the elder home where Renee's grandmother had died. We combed through years of files under flickering fluorescent light. The pattern emerged fast. 3 patients dead within months of each other, all listed under cardiac failure, none with a prior history of heart disease. Each had been classified as special care, which granted extra staff access, and each had Kayla Mercer listed as a volunteer. Renee's hand shook as she pointed to the records. It wasn't coincidence, it was a method. We found a retired nurse who had worked there at the time. She remembered Kayla well. Pleasant but oddly insistent on tending to residents who didn't need much help. They'd start acting strange, the nurse told us, confused, sleepy. Then their hearts would give out. The nurse's eyes brimmed with tears. We thought it was old age. Now, I'm not so sure. The web was wider than either of us imagined, and at its center were 2 names: Kayla Mercer and Dr. Raymond Cole. They had turned trust into a weapon and care into currency. But they had underestimated one thing: a woman who had already lived through betrayal and had nothing left to lose. Cole Cardiology Group announced a charity gala for heart health that month, an opulent... I waited until the applause faded before standing. My voice was calm, but it sliced through the room. Dr. Cole, I said, why does one of the drug lot numbers in your presentation match the batch later found in unauthorized possession by one of your employees? The air went still. His smile froze. And before he could answer, Renee connected her phone to the presentation screen. A video filled the projection. Kayla, in her car trunk, hiding a small white box. Gasps spread across the tables. Donors exchanged glances. Sponsors whispered. Dr. Cole's face turned the color of ash. That night, the truth began to catch fire. The fallout from that night spread faster than I could have imagined. By morning, Cole Cardiology Group was the talk of every medical board and news outlet in Atlanta. Donors pulled their support, employees quit, and the clinic's pristine reputation began to rot from the inside out. Whispers turned into formal investigations, and both Cole and Kayla found themselves under relentless scrutiny. I knew it was only a matter of time before one of them broke under the pressure. It didn't take long. 2 nights later, Renee and I sat quietly in the corner of St. Jude's VIP lounge, where Cole had arranged a private meeting with Kayla. He had told her they needed to clean things up, to get their stories straight before investigators arrived. What he didn't know was that a small recorder was hidden inside the bouquet of lilies I'd had delivered to his office earlier that day. I could almost feel my heartbeat sinking with the red light blinking faintly inside the petals. They entered the room together, unaware of our presence in the adjoining one. His voice was tight, angry. "You've drawn too much attention," he snapped. "You should have kept your distance from that woman." He meant me. Kayla's tone, though, wasn't submissive anymore. She was desperate and defensive, her words tumbling out faster than she could control them. "You told me she'd be easy to handle," she hissed. "You said the doses would take months to show, just like at Magnolia Crest." My stomach turned as she continued, detailing the process out loud, how she'd started with small doses to dull memory, how larger ones made the heart fail quietly, how she'd practiced the method before with patients who trusted her. It was all there. Every confession, every hidden crime spilled freely in the air. Then came the moment that sealed everything. Cole told her to stay quiet, to let the old woman fade into confusion again, and Kayla snapped, shouting, "You think I'm stupid?" Eleanor Price didn't fade. She died because of us. The room went deathly still, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door opening. Detective Sloane Parker stepped inside, her badge glinting under the fluorescent light. 2 officers followed, their voices low but firm. "Kayla Mercer, Dr. Raymond Cole, you're both under arrest." The look on their faces was something I will never forget. Kayla froze first, her mouth open, her hands trembling. Cole's mask cracked next, panic flickering behind his eyes as he tried to protest, insisting it was all lies. But the recorder inside the lilies had already captured everything, the words, the tone, even the way his voice had softened when he called her Kay. The betrayal wasn't just criminal, it was personal. That night, as I watched them being led away in handcuffs, the rush of justice didn't bring the joy I thought it would. What I felt instead was a quiet, aching relief. For the first time in a year, I could breathe without fear of what waited in my own kitchen, my own glass, my own home. The arrest made headlines by sunrise. Dr. Cole's medical license was suspended, and Kayla faced charges of attempted murder, elder abuse, and financial exploitation. News outlets began connecting their scheme to the mysterious deaths at Magnolia Crest. Families came forward, angry and heartbroken, demanding answers. For every name that surfaced, Renee and I knew there were likely more. People whose lives had ended quietly, their trust betrayed by those meant to protect them. In the courtroom weeks later, the air was thick with tension. Rows of families filled the benches, sons, daughters, and grandchildren of the victims. I sat in the front row, my hands folded tightly in my lap, while Kayla entered in shackles. Gone was the woman who smiled so perfectly across dinner tables, her hair hung limp, her eyes darting nervously around the room, searching for anyone who might still stand by her. She found none. Cole avoided her gaze completely, his jaw locked in cold silence. When the prosecutor began playing the recordings, the sound of Kayla's voice describing how she measured the doses sent murmurs rippling through the courtroom. People wept quietly in the back rows. The nurse from Magnolia Crest sat beside Renee, her hands trembling but her chin high. The jury watched with wide, horrified eyes. By the time the final audio clip ended, there was nothing left for Kayla or Cole to say. Their empire of manipulation had been dismantled, piece by piece, by the very people they had underestimated, by the voices they had silenced for years. When the verdict came, guilty on every count, the courtroom erupted in relief. The sound of people crying wasn't from sadness anymore, it was release. Kayla's composure shattered completely. She screamed at the officers as they led her away, blaming Cole, blaming everyone but herself. He remained motionless, staring down at his hands, as if finally seeing the weight of what he'd done. For me, the moment wasn't triumph. It was closure. Justice had been served, but it came too late for many. I walked out of that courthouse into a bright, cold afternoon, the city moving on as if nothing had happened. But inside me, something had settled. The poison that once haunted my body and my mind had finally been purged. Not just from my veins, but from my life. 6 months later, I wake each morning to sunlight spilling across my kitchen table. The air feels lighter. I tend my garden again, the soil cool between my fingers, planting tomatoes beside marigolds just like I used to. Every sprout feels like a small resurrection, a reminder that I survived. Jordan visits often now. There's guilt in his eyes still, but it's softening into love. We talk about rebuilding, slowly, quietly, honestly. Renee and I meet for coffee every Sunday. She's studying to become a patient advocate, determined to make sure what happened to her grandmother never happens again. Sometimes we talk about Eleanor, and we smile through the sadness. I tell her I think Eleanor would be proud of her, that her courage saved more than just one life. I've started sharing my story publicly. At first, my voice shook every time I spoke, but now, when I stand before others, women, elders, families, I see understanding in their faces. They nod, they cry, they whisper afterward that they've seen the same signs, felt the same fear. Every time one of them finds the courage to speak, I know the pain I endured wasn't in vain. I used to think survival meant escaping death, but I've learned it's more than that. Survival is choosing to rebuild in the light after someone tried to bury you in the dark. Thank you for watching until the end. If my story spoke to you, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you've ever faced betrayal or fought to reclaim your voice, tell your story in the comments because your voice matters here, always.